This sermon was recorded at the Church of Christ, Northwest Arkansas. We are Christians seeking to worship God in spirit and in truth, according to the New Testament. Come worship with us Sunday mornings at 10:30 at 1708 Elm Springs Road in Springdale, Arkansas.
I'd like to join in in welcoming everybody here this morning. I'm glad that you made the decision to be with us. I know there's a lot of other places that you could be this morning, and I'm glad that you chose to be here so we could worship God together. I appreciate the song service and really appreciate all your participation in the songs. And I'm going to invite you to continue to participate with us as we study a portion of God's Word this morning. And for a little while today, I want to talk about transforming your life. We get this concept from Romans chapter 12. If you want to turn with your Bibles, you can. I'll have the verses on the screen behind me. But in Romans chapter 12, Paul writes to us and tells us to transform our life by the renewing of your mind. Another thing that Paul wrote a while back is that we have to live in this world, but not be of the world. And when we look around at the world around us, we know it's full of sin. We know there's full of trials and tribulations. There's a lot of hopelessness from a lot of people. When you look at this image on the screen, you can see you've got the two different sides there. And sometimes all of this sin feels like we live in the world that's on the left side. It's just like a desert. There's just no hope there. There's no life. And it just can get overwhelming at times. It can feel quite bleak at times. And Paul tells us that we have to live in this world for a time being. And living in this world without being of this world. Sin and temptation is constantly going to be around us. And that sin is constantly influencing us. It's pulling us to be more like the world each and every day. I've had a lot of conversations with Christians who's been a Christian for a while. And a common theme that I hear from some people is in their Christian walk, they feel like their fire was the brightest the day they were baptized. And then it was just constantly downhill from there. Other times you talk with Christians and they feel like it's this ebb and flow of sometimes like we're on fire, we're doing great for the Lord, and then before you know it, we're back into the world. And then we catch ourselves and we need to get back. So we get back on track and we do the things that we're supposed to, and then we're back into the world again. And it's just this always ebb and flow until we die. And we see those two different things. We see that whether your light was the brightest the day we were baptized or whether you have this ebb and flow, we know the Bible teaches us that it should not be that way. The Bible tells us in Ephesians that we should grow up into Christ in all things, and that implies we're constantly growing into Him. We're getting stronger, we're getting more dedicated, we're finding more fulfillment in Christ all the time, not the ebbs and flows and not the steady decline. So Paul is writing to us here, and he tells us that we should be transforming our lives. So let's look for a little bit at that. Romans chapter 12, beginning verse 2, Paul says, "Be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Let's look at some definitions right quick. That word conformed, it means to be similar to or the same as something. It means to fit in. It doesn't take a lot of effort to conform to something. You just kind of go with the flow. You fit into your surroundings. What Paul is writing to us here is be not conformed to this world. We always know that the sin and temptations are always going to be around us. It's easy to conform to that, just to allow yourself to fall into that. But he tells us to be transformed. That word transformed means to make a thorough or dramatic change in the form, appearance, or character. That takes intentionality. That takes effort. That takes work to transform yourself. So instead of being conformed, falling into the world, we transform, we make a thorough or dramatic change in our lives, and we do that by renewing your mind. When you look up that word renewing, it means renovating, a complete change for the better. When I think of the word renovating, of course, most of you know that I renovate or I remodel houses from time to time, and that word makes sense to me, to renovate. So what Paul is telling us here is to renovate our mind for the purpose of transforming or making a dramatic and intentional change into more godliness. The alternative of renovating your mind and transforming would be to conform or to fall into the patterns of this world. So let's look at that for an illustration. You have the man here, and you can see like you've got two different ways you can go. One is you can conform to the world, which doesn't take a lot of effort. You're just going to naturally fall into that pattern. You're naturally going to fit in with the people around you or what's influencing around you. So you conform, and that's going to lead you to the world. It's on the left-hand side of the screen, the hopelessness. Or you can choose to transform, make a deliberate change and dramatic change for the purpose of getting into more godliness. When you look at these two things, being conformed is externally influenced. There's external things around you that's going to pull you in the direction that it wants you to go. You're going to follow after that. It's a passive process. You don't really have to do much to be conformed. It just kind of happens naturally without a lot of effort and a lot of work. And it's going to be aligned with the world. Paul is telling us, don't fall after this. Don't go after this pattern. But instead, to be transformed, that's an internal change. Instead of being externally influenced, we're changed internally. And that internal change is what drives the intentional process, which is the number 2. It's intentional. It takes action. It takes work. It takes dedication to be transformed and to make that change. And that is where you're going to be aligned with God's will. We have a choice to make. And this is a daily choice that you can see. You're either going to allow yourself to be conformed to the world, or you're going to focus in intentional action to be transformed into godliness. We know that all the influences around us deceives us, and Paul wrote about that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 33, where he says, "Be not deceived, bad company ruins good morals." Do you think that there's bad company around you from time to time in the world? It's always there. Paul says we have to live in this world. We're going to be around sin and temptation and hard things and bad company. It's going to be around us, but we cannot afford to be of the world. Don't let it influence you off. Don't be conformed to the world. So we know that without taking this dedicated and intentional action, we're easily going to slip right back into the life of sin, and most of the time without even realizing it. I know every one of us in this room, we've had that time before, where we just look up one day and be like, what am I doing? I'm not doing what God wanted me to do. I'm following after this life of sin, or I'm doing things that are of the world, not things that are of God. And it just happens. And it happens because we don't consistently take the intentional action with dedication to be transformed unto God. So that's what I want to talk about. We face this frustration of having this spiritual growth. And then before we know it, we're falling right back into the sin again. And we feel like we're not really having a real change, that there's not really this real change in our life, that when we were baptized, we became a new man. We know that when you're baptized, you're supposed to put on a new man, but sometimes we feel like, well, maybe that didn't work for me. Maybe I didn't do what I was supposed to do, or maybe I wasn't really changed. Maybe I'm not really a Christian, because we allow ourselves to fall back into that world of sin. And I want to tell you this morning that you're not the only one that faced that problem. That every single one of us, we face that where it's easy to be conformed into this world. In fact, an example we have in the Old Testament is King David, where he faced that. When you look at King David in his life, he did a lot of great things for the Lord. He did amazing things that God wanted him to, but he also committed sin. We know he committed adultery with Bathsheba. We know he had her husband killed in battle, Uriah. So he faced hard times as well. But David wrote something in Psalms that I thought was quite interesting. Psalms chapter 119, beginning in verse 30. David says, "I have chosen the way of truth. Thy judgments have I laid before me. I have stuck unto thy testimonies. O Lord, put me not to shame. I will run the way of thy commandments, and when thou shalt enlarge my heart. Teach me, O Lord, the way of thy statutes, and I shall keep it unto the end. Give me understanding, and I shall keep the law. Yea, I shall observe it with my whole heart." Let's break this down and see what David's really saying. He's saying 4 main things through these verses. The first thing, it says he's made a choice. It says he's chosen the way. It's a dedicated choice that David made. After making that choice, he seeks knowledge. Where he says there in verse 33, it says, "Teach me, O Lord, the way of thy statutes." He's going after knowledge. When he receives that knowledge, then he's going to put it to work and he's going to take action. That action where he says, "I shall keep it. Teach me laws, give me understanding, and I will keep thy law." I will do what I'm supposed to do and take action. And then finally, he says he's going to stay committed. He's going to do these things and stay committed till the end. He's going to observe it with his whole heart. So we see these 4 things, and we look at what Paul told us in Romans chapter 12, to be not conformed to this world, but be transformed. And then we look at what David says, and David says, this is how I'm transformed. I make a choice, I seek knowledge, I take action, and I stay committed to the whole thing. And what I want to do for this lesson is I want to merge these 2 trains of thoughts together. I want to see what Paul told us in Romans, and I want to take what David told us in Psalms, and we're going to merge these 2 together with the idea that Paul told us how we be transformed is by the renewing or the renovating of your mind. And we're going to use the example this morning of renovating a house and see how we renovate a house is similar to how we renovate our mind for the purpose of transforming our life into more godliness. So when you think about renovating a house, the first thing that you have to do is make a choice, just like what David did. You see the project and you have to make a choice. Let's look back in Romans chapter 12. It says, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of their mind." When you see those two underlines, it says, "Be not conformed, but be ye transformed." That tells us that you have a choice. You get to decide, are you going to be conformed or are you going to be transformed? And in Psalms chapter 119, David says, "I've chosen the way of truth." It is a choice. Here's a recent house that we recently renovated. This is over here in Springdale. This is what it looked like the day that we started the renovations. That's a rough looking house, isn't it? I'm not sure anybody in here would choose to live in a house that's rough. It needs a lot of work. It's old, it's worn out, it needs a lot of work, it's going to take a lot of time, it's going to take a lot of effort. And you have a decision that you make. When you see a house like this, you have a choice. You can either look at it and you can say like, man, that just needs too much work, it's too far gone. There's nothing that can be done. It just needs to be bulldozed, started over, there's nothing that can happen. Or you can choose to look at the potential. What could this house turn into? How could we fix it up? What is the potential of this house? When we think about that, sometimes our lives feel the same way. Sometimes you look at your life and you examine all the different problems you may have and all the different struggles. You have a choice to make. The choice is, maybe my life's too far gone. Maybe there's too much that I just can't do it. There's no hope for me. Or maybe the choice is you look at your potential. You know, God says your soul is valuable, and He says your soul has worth, and it is beneficial for Him and for His kingdom if you choose to renovate it, if you choose to make it work for Him. So you have a decision to make when you look at a house like this, and also when you look at your life and your mind. Romans chapter 6, beginning in verse 16, it says, "Know you not that to whom ye yield yourselves servants to obey, His servants ye are to whom ye obey, whether of sin unto death, or of obedience unto righteousness. But God be thanked that ye were the servants of sin, but you have obeyed from that heart the form of doctrine which was delivered you. Being then made free from sin, you became the servants of righteousness." Paul's writing here in Romans, he's saying you have to make the decision. You make the decision to not be the servant of sin and choose to be the servant of righteousness. When you look at that, here's kind of how that works. You make the choice, and that choice is going to dictate your actions. When you look up the word decision, the word decision literally means to cut off all other options. It's to decide, to cut off all other options. So when you make a decision to follow God, you're cutting off every other route possible. That decision is going to tell you what actions you need to take. It's going to lead your actions. You do those actions long enough and frequent enough, and that becomes habits. So those actions will lead to habits, and your habits over time is what's going to build your character. But it all starts with the choice. You have to make that choice in order to follow after God and to not be the servants of sin. In Joshua chapter 24, verse 15, Joshua said, "And if it seem evil unto you to serve the Lord, choose you this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the floods, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Joshua is telling the people at that time, and I believe he's telling us the same day, is you make the choice today, and you make the choice every day to choose who you're going to follow. Are you going to follow after God and after righteousness and transform your life? Or are you going to choose to follow after what he was saying is other gods that were on the other side of the floods, other gods of the Amorites, maybe other gods of the worlds today, maybe idolatry, maybe self-fulfillment, whatever you want to do. It's a choice that you make, and it all starts with the choice. So step one for renovating your life and step one for renovating a house is simply make a choice. Or is it worth renovating, and are you going to renovate it? Are you going to take on this project? If you are going to take this project on, you're all going to work on renovating your life, then you go on to step two. Step two, as David said, was seek knowledge. Go after him and seek knowledge of what you can do. In Romans chapter 12 again, it tells us by the renewing of your mind. You renew your mind. You increase your knowledge. And in Psalms chapter 119, verse 33, David says, to teach me, O Lord, the way of thy statutes, and I shall keep it to the end. So we have to seek knowledge. When you think about the analogy of renovating a house, there's really a lot of ways that you can renovate a house. There's a lot of different things you can do. There's a lot of different models you can follow. There's a lot of different examples. Probably one of the worst things you can do is to go into a renovation without a plan and without really thinking of what it's really going to take. So you want to seek knowledge to see what it's going to take. Think about the order of things as far as renovating a house. The house that we did, we completely gutted it, meaning we pulled everything else. So what would it look like if we went into that house to renovate it, and before doing demo and before pulling stuff out, we decided, well, let's go ahead and just put some new cabinets in first. Let's go ahead and put new electrical. Let's put new flooring. Let's stage it before we did any demo, before we took anything out. That would be ridiculous, right? There's an order to doing things. And there's an order to doing things to renovate your mind as well. There's a way that if you seek knowledge, and we know the pure and the best way is God's way, that when you seek knowledge from Him, you're going to follow this process. You're going to follow His process, and it's going to work out well for you. And if you choose not to follow that process, it's quite foolish to just do whatever you want to do without seeking knowledge first. Proverbs chapter 11, verse 14, it says, where no counsel is, the people fall. But in a multitude of counselors, there is safety. So we want to have a multitude of counselors. And we have a multitude of counselors through the Scriptures. We have the apostles, we have the letters from Paul, we have the prophets in the Old Testament, we have the laws from Moses, we have all these different things of these counselors, so to speak, that we can seek knowledge from. We also have counselors around us. We have other people that can lead us and help us. And it tells us that when we use those multitude of counselors, when we go after that knowledge, there's safety in that. We know it's going to be okay. When we don't go after counsel, it's going to fail. It is not going to work out. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 12, it says, there's a way that seemeth right unto man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. And if you're going into renovating a house, you may be thinking in your minds like, okay, I think I know what to do. I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to figure it out along the way. That may seem like an okay plan until you start running into challenges and you don't know what to do, and it's not going to work out. Or you can seek knowledge. You can ask people who's done it before. You can go after them and say, hey, what do you do in these situations? How do you handle this? How do you foresee problems before they arise? That's all about seeking knowledge, which is the step 2. Knowledge is an incredibly valuable thing. And it's so valuable that we need to be seeking it all the time. It talks about that in Proverbs chapter 2, beginning in verse 1. It says, my son, if thou wilt receive my words, and lay up my commandments with thee, so as to incline thine ear unto wisdom, and apply thy heart to understanding. Yea, if thou cry after discernment, and lift up thy voice for understanding, if thou seek her, knowledge, as silver, and search for her as hid treasures, then shalt thou understand the fear of Jehovah, and find the knowledge of God. Proverbs, Solomon here is talking about in Proverbs how valuable knowledge is for us. Now remember who wrote this. This is Solomon. This is the wisest man that ever lived. He could ask God for anything that he wanted to, and what did he ask God for? Give me knowledge. Give me wisdom. Show me how to apply it, and teach me your ways. And this is Solomon using that knowledge that was gifted to him by God and telling us how valuable that knowledge is. It's probably wise for us to pay attention to that. Knowledge is incredibly valuable for us. Whether it's renovating a house or whether it's renovating your life, it's knowledge. So you've made the decision to renovate your life. You've gone after and you've found knowledge. You've looked for increasing in their understanding. So now let's get on to step 3. Step 3, it's time to take action. Now it's time to get to work. Romans chapter 12 and verse 2, it tells us that we may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. And in Psalms chapter 119, verse 34, David says, I will keep the law. I'll observe it with my whole heart. So these 2 verses, both of these imply that work or action is involved, that we have to do something. It's not enough just to make the decision and get knowledge. Now we got to put it to work. Now we got to do something with it. In Ephesians chapter 4, it tells us that you put off concerning the former conversation of the old man, which is corrupt according to the deceitful lust. One of the steps you need to do when you're renovating your mind, you got to get all the junk out. Well, that's the same thing as renovating a house, isn't it? This is the same house that we looked at just a little bit ago. This is about halfway through what we call the demo process of removing all the old stuff out. All the old, useless, worn out, rotted, all the junk, we're removing it out. This is about halfway through. You know, during this process, when you're going through and pulling that stuff out, sometimes it looks worse before it gets better. Look at the pictures of this house and remember the pictures that we just looked at. Who wants to live in this? We probably prefer the old pictures, right? At least we had cabinets, we had a sink, we had a bathroom. Now we're down to studs, and then we just got stuff all over the place. Something else you look at when you're renovating an old house, you're pulling off the sheetrock and you're pulling stuff off. Then you start seeing all this rotted wood. You see termite damage, you see moisture damage, you see all these problems like, oh man, I didn't see that coming. This is worse than what I thought. And sometimes it's the same when we're renovating our life. When we're removing the old junk out, it's hard and it's painful. And sometimes we have this temptation, is like, man, I should just stop here before it gets any worse. I'm not going to go any further. I'm going to go back to the way it was, and at least it was okay. It wasn't great, but it was okay. And that's a temptation that we have to avoid. We have to keep going. If you made the decision to renovate your life, then renovate your life. You can't stop halfway through the demo process when it gets worse before it gets better. Because the truth is, it will get better. You just have to keep going. And it tells us that in Ephesians. So Ephesians 4, we just looked up, put off the old man, keep reading. In verse 23, it says, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and that you put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. So after you remove the old and outdated and useless materials, you've put off the old man, now it's time to put on the new man. It's time to bring in the good stuff. It's all the new, it's the nice, it's the useful. Bring in the good materials. Then you have a house that actually starts looking more like a home again. You put on new siding, you put new windows, you put a new porch, new flooring, new cabinets, counters. You start bringing in as much good stuff as you can. You want to pull out as much old bad stuff and put in all the good stuff and all the new stuff. And you have to finish that process. You have to be able to bring in the new stuff. It's not enough just to pull out the old. Jesus taught us this in a parable in Matthew chapter 12, beginning of verse 43. He says, when the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, the old stuff, it's pulled out. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walketh through dry places, he's seeking rest, and findeth none. Then he, the spirit, says, I will return into my house from whence I came out. And when he is come, he findeth it empty, and swept, and garnished. Then goeth he, and taketh with himself 7 other spirits, more wicked than himself. And they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of the man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation. What Jesus is telling us is removing the spirit is good, and it's not enough. If you remove the spirit and you leave that evil, that empty space, that spirit's coming back, and he's coming back with buddies. And he's coming back with more spirit and more problems. The same thing with our life. You remove the old, you remove the junk, you remove the sin, you remove the temptation. If you don't replace it, it's coming back. And it's coming back harder, and there's going to be more friends with it, and it's going to be a whole lot worse. So we have to bring in the new stuff. You fill it with godliness. You fill it with righteousness. You fill it with new friends, new peers, new people to hang out with, new influences. Don't leave it empty. Don't just leave the bad stuff out, because it will come back, and it will hurt you a lot worse. So step 3 is about taking action. Remove the old, bring in the new. Then we get on to step 4, and that's about staying committed. Stay committed to the path. In Psalms chapter 119, David says, I shall observe it with my whole heart. Not a little bit, my whole heart. I'm going to stay committed to the end. Finish that job. When you think about renovating a house, I know you've probably all heard this, and I'm going to echo it too, because it's true. Renovating a house is always harder than you think. It always takes more money, more time, more energy. There's always problems that you didn't know were going to happen. There's always going to be distractions that come up. It is always harder than you think. And you will run into these challenges. Jesus told us that we're going to run into challenges as well. And it's probably going to be harder than you think. In John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus said, these things I have spoken to you, that in me ye might have peace. In the world ye shall have tribulation. But be of good cheer, I have overcome the world. Jesus said we're going to have troubles. We're going to have challenges that, man, they just blindside us. We never saw that one coming. But keep going. Be of good cheer. Stay on the path. Do what you need to do to get through it, because Jesus is with you and He's going to help you through that. Sometimes the hardest parts of renovating a house is finishing it. It's the last little things. We've been remodeling our kitchen now for about 1.5 years. We still don't have trim work up, and it's just sitting there. It's the last little details that is the hardest thing to get through, and finishing that job. We want to get distracted. We want to go start other projects. We want to go find something else to do. But finish the job and stay committed. If you look at Hebrews chapter 10, verse 22, the writer of Hebrews says, "Let us draw near with a true heart in full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for He is faithful that promised." We have to hold fast without wavering. Don't get distracted. Don't let the influences of this world bring you back in. Stay committed to the renovation process. Stay on the path of your vision. Stay on the path of God's vision for you to continually grow up into Him in all things. We have to finish it. Stay on the path. So just to recap, we have these 4 things we have to do. We have to make the decision to renovate your life. It is worth it. And you have to make that choice that it's worth it for you. After you've made that decision, seek knowledge, look for help, look for guidance, find ways that you can grow. And then you have to take action. Take action means continually removing the old and putting in the new. And that's a never-ending process. And you have to stay committed towards that process. Stay committed to the goal. So as you can see, with renovating a house, you can have a major renovation on a house, and that's good. I showed you some pictures of one. We took an old, worn-out house, and we made it new. We turned it into a nice home, and that was a one-time project in order to turn that house into a new one. But you know, that house, it's going to need continual upkeep. It's going to need more attention to it over time, or it's going to get run back down. It's going to need the AC filters replaced. It's going to need cleaning from time to time. It's going to need small things replaced. It's going to need continual maintenance and work all the time. We call that home ownership, that you're always working on maintaining, if not improving, your house all the time. And it's the same thing with our mind. It's not a one-time process to renovate your mind. This is a continual process. Look back at Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Paul says, by the renewing of your mind. That means a never ending. He doesn't just say to renew it like it's once and done. He says renewing. You keep going over and over and over. So this is a continual process that we're going to do over and over again. We're always taking out the old, taking out the worldly, and replacing it with good and godly. Always. Keep on that process. Just like with renovating a house, the reason why you do that, the desired outcome, is to provide something that is old and worn out, and you turn that into a nice, livable home for a family. Sometimes when you're renovating a house, it's good to put yourself into the end consumer, or put yourself in who is going to buy this house, who's going to move their family in, and think about it from their perspective. What would they want? How do they want this house to work? And you do that, that helps keep your motivation high, helps you finish the job. You're thinking about somebody else, you're doing it for them, and you keep it going. You put yourself in their shoes. Well, the desired outcome for renovating our mind is to turn the useless, deceitful, and worldly mind that's leading us astray, to turn it into a home and an abode for Jesus. Jesus tells us that he'll make His abode with us. In John chapter 14, verse 23, it says, Jesus answered and said unto him, if a man love me, and he keep my words, and my Father will love him, and we will come in unto him, and make our abode with him. The purpose for renovating our mind is to make an abode with Christ, so Christ can come and dwell with us. So I want you to think about that. When we're thinking about making that decision to renovate your mind, is it worth it? Is it worth it for Christ to make His abode with you? Make it worth it for Him. And do what you can so that He has this proper dwelling place, because He deserves it. By following these 4 simple steps of making a choice, seeking knowledge, taking action, and staying committed, our lives will improve. They'll get better, It will keep getting better and better for you. We'll renovate our mind to be more Christ-like. We choose to live for Him. We choose to follow after His words. And then we can look at verses like Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, where Paul says, I am crucified with Christ. And he says crucified meaning the old man. The old man's done. He's dead. He no longer exists. And I'm crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live. I, the new man, am now alive. And I'm following after Christ. But it's not me that's living anymore. It's not I, but it's Christ that lives in me. And He makes our abode with us. It's His life now. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. We think about Christ and we think about everything He did for us. Is it not worth it for Him that we renovate our life and live for Him from now on? It's now His life. It's not our life. So I want you to think about that as we look at transforming our life. Paul taught us in Romans chapter 12, verse 2, to be not conformed. Don't just fall into the patterns of the world, but be transformed. Make a deliberate, intentional change for the purpose of doing better. And you do that by renewing or renovating your mind. So I pray this study was beneficial for you this morning. I want you to think about anytime you're looking at renovations, anytime you're looking at something that needs to be improved, hopefully it will be a reminder for you to renovate your life. Continually renovate your own mind. Think about how you can constantly pull out the old, pull out the things that are not serving you unto godliness. Pull out the sin, pull out the temptation, pull out the evil influences that are all around you, and replace it with godliness. Replace it with good. Replace it with influences that will help lead you unto more love and to more good works, as it talks about in Hebrews. So I want you to think about that. Anytime you think about any kind of renovation, as a reminder to renovate your own life and your own mind. If there's any here that you haven't chosen to follow after Christ this morning, you haven't been baptized into Him, and you still are living as that old man, is it worth it for you to make that choice today? Is your life valuable enough that you want to make that decision to cut off the old man and to put on the new? Well, you can do that this morning. You do that through baptism. Let Him wash away your sins. Let Him crucify that old man. Bury that old man in baptism. If you haven't done that this morning, then consider that. Think about your life is worth it. God says you're valuable, and He wants you to do that. He wants to give you that new man to live under Him. If you have already been baptized into Christ and you've been constantly living in that state of ebbs and flows of we're doing good and then we're falling down, then we're doing good and following down, I want you to think about renovating your mind as a continual and constant process. So we're always working to grow up into Him, grow up into Christ in all things, and do what we can to serve Him and follow after Him. Seek knowledge, ask for help, see how we can help you. We can study together, we can pray with you, we can help hold you accountable, we can work on a deliberate plan and intentional action for you and for your sake, and make sure that you're constantly renovating your life. If there's one that you'd like to submit your life in Christ to baptism this morning, or you need the prayers, the help of the church, for whatever the case, come and have a seat on these front chairs when we stand and sing the song that's been selected.
We hope you enjoyed this teaching from God's Word. If there's anything we can do to help you in your walk with Christ, send us a message at facebook.com/CFCNWA. To find more sermons, look for us on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, and like our Facebook page. Thanks for listening, and God bless.